Hello, welcome to Meet the Author with Author Event Network. I'm Guy Morris, founder of the Author Event Network, and today we have one of our authors from the Portland chapter, Zachary Daniels. Welcome, Zachary. How you doing?
Thanks, Guy. Great to be here. Excited to talk about my book and talk about writing.
Well, we're excited to have you. Zachary, let's start by why don't you tell us about what genre you write and what inspired you to start writing?
Yeah, so I write mystery thriller, and really what started, well, I'd say about 10 years ago, you would never guess that I would have written a book. Mm-hmm. I hated writing, was bad at spelling, bad at grammar, but through college, I took a course with a professor that she only allowed us to write 250 to 500 word assignments. You know, a whole semester, write 3 papers. And it really changed my perspective about writing because it was all an emphasis on fitting as much in and saying as much with as few words as possible. Mm-hmm. And it kind of opened my eyes to that medium. Whereas before, you know, teachers, professors have you write 10, 15 pages and you're just writing to write. Mm-hmm. And, you know, about a year after that course, I had an idea for a movie in my head. And, you know, I don't have oogles of money or a film crew or that expertise, but I thought the best way to bring it to life was through a book. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did, and I kind of took that perspective of trying to make every word matter and fitting in, you know, as much in between the lines as possible. And just that what born me as an author, and, you know, why I'm here today now, all these years later.
Excellent. Now, you've only got the one book. Are you planning some more?
I am. So this is the debut book,
okay.
But I've already started on the second one, and the second one's going to be much more of a straight thriller. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into this book a little bit later, but it's a little bit more character driven. Well, the next one's going to be very much more plot driven, mm-hmm. And it's going to center around my expertise in Bitcoin, which has been a passion of mine for some time. But it's going to draw on that expertise to kind of fill in the technical side of the thriller, and bring in, you know, some of this novel where the character development, the dialogue, and all that. So it's kind of going to blend those together, and I'm really excited about it.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's going to be called The Last Block.
Oh, interesting. Well, Bitcoin, digital currencies will go through some transitions, but they probably won't go away. I don't know if you know, but the World Economic Forum is considering them as a replacement to the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that.
So do I.
Yeah.
Well, that actually gets into my next question, which is, what do you consider the key themes of your book, and what do you want your readers to discover from reading them?
Well, I think, if you just, at the surface, it's just, you know, a good mystery thriller. But I think as you kind of dig into, I was very purposeful in my writing and trying to layer in different themes and subplots and subcontexts within each character, to where the deeper you read in the book, the more you're going to understand about the character's family and the dynamics and why certain things might not be as they seem. But in general, the themes are a lot of dwelling on the past and, overcoming traumas that have happened in your life. And the main character is really stuck on those, early childhood, mid-childhood, and it really stunts the rest of his development through adulthood, mm-hmm. and really his relationships going forward. So it's kind of, some of the themes play on, obviously moving on from the past and healing from the past to a better future, because, if you dwell in the past, you'll have no future. I think that's a famous quote by someone, but, there's a lot of themes of that, a lot of themes of family, and just kind of perspective. So forgiveness and moving on. I think that's a lot of the themes I have through this book and my general writing. It's not something that it's like blaring, like it just is overpronounced in the book and I'm trying to give a message, but you can kind of read in between the lines of how I structure and develop the characters, that's some of the conclusions that I'm trying to reach. And it's, at the core of the book, it's a tragedy. So, Shakespeare has, the comedy, the drama, and the tragedy. Mm-hmm. And all stories kind of all fall within those graphs. Mm-hmm. And so, I designed my book as a tragedy. So obviously, I think if most people read it, they wouldn't think immediately, oh, that's a tragedy. But if you put it through that lens, it most certainly is.
Now, where does the theme or where does the emphasis of the thriller part come from, which typically implies some sort of suspense or some mystery or, something to solve that could lead to danger? How are you weaving that in?
Yeah, it's the underlying subplot that drives the story, and so the thriller aspect is the main character's trying to figure out his father's cold case murder now that DNA technology is available, and he has his best friend who's a police officer kind of re-looking into the case. And so it's kind of weaving in with DNA technology, rediscovering different leads and patterns. He's kind of discovering more about his family that he didn't think was possible, and it kind of leads down different threads that culminate at the end of the book with the big climax and reveals. But I always, the most engaging movies and books that I read, always have that kind of element of thriller or suspense in there. And so that's kind of why I was drawn to writing it myself.
Now, interesting, I love the title, Manifest Destiny. Where did the title come from?
It came from the old historical term, Manifest Destiny, that the United States was destined to expand sea to sea and across the Mississippi. But it's kind of a play on the main character's grief and anger and holding on to the past. And it's the manifest destiny that explodes. If you hold it in, it can't be withheld. And so it's kind of a play on that. And I like Manifest Destiny. I'm a history buff, and it just seemed like a powerful, title for the book. And it just spoke to me. So
no, it's a great title. What do you think makes your book different compared to the other average thriller or mystery?
I think, in general, mystery thrillers are very plot-driven. I kind of alluded to this earlier, whereas I think mine's much more character-driven. So, whereas a lot of mystery thrillers, the plot's driving the action or the character development, and not to say that that's not happening here, but I would say a lot of the story and a lot of what someone is going to take away at the end is the character. So the character arc and the kind of a character study of what the circumstances around him and what his life choices have led him to. And that's kind of, I think something makes my novel a little bit different than most in the genre.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are some great thriller authors out there that you do allow us to explore the character some, but for the most part, they do tend to be plot driven. And I think the better that we can balance that, I think the more appealing the genre is. What was your favorite part of the book to write?
Probably it's probably about third, maybe halfway through the book. There's a prison dialogue between the main character Nick and someone who was suspected of his father's murder. He's going to visit him in prison. He's trying to get a DNA sample from him. They aren't quite sure if he did it or not, but I really liked it because of there's something very engaging, whether you read it or watch on the screen, of dialogue. Saying things, but just the connotations of how you say them, the way, the kind of how you structure the sentence, it can mean so many different things, and you can glean a lot from the character, the power dynamics, the situation, the kind of entendres from a little bit of dialogue that I think is really riveting, and I think that's where the book shines probably the most. It's fun. It's a fun exchange. It's a tense exchange. You get a lot from it about each of the characters, their backstories, their perspectives, without them, spelling it out in like an expose per se. And I think that's really a tough part to write. I know it's certainly been something that will continue to develop, but I think that's kind of where the book, that's probably my favorite part, is their dialogue and interaction. So
excellent. Now, when you started to become a writer, who were some of your favorite authors, and what inspired you about what they did?
Yeah, so the first books that I really read that I would consider like adult novels was John Grisham. So The Firm. I remember I read The Firm like 3 times in a row. Like, it was my first like adult book. and I, Street Lawyer and Pelican Brief and all those. And so I think John Grisham was really the first author that I really liked, and his are like lawyer drama / thriller, and so that's probably had some influence on kind of the direction that I take my book. Now, this book doesn't have any lawyer stuff in it, but I would say that's probably the seminal author that I originally was kind of drawn to, and I kind of did a different approach. Is I didn't read much fiction, really any fiction, while I was writing the book. So I really wanted most of the ideas that I had, in the book, or I didn't want to draw subconsciously from other authors or copy their style and be like, oh, I really like, and so I really wanted that. So I read a lot of nonfiction while I was doing the book, but not too much fiction. So.
Well, you mentioned nonfiction while you're writing the book. What kind of research did you do that went into the backstory?
Yeah, well, I have a background in nuclear medicine and healthcare, and so the DNA stuff made a lot of sense to me. The book takes place on the East Coast, so locations, everything timing wise, seasons, when the sun goes down, when the sun comes up. There's all things I had to look at and be like, okay, I said the sun comes up. Is it the right time in September 15th, or were the Yankees playing in October of 1995 on the 5th? Things like that. I did my research, and maybe that also comes from I'm in investments, so that kind of investment research, and be like, well, if someone asks you about that, and I had my friend who's a aerospace engineer comb through the book, and he's like, what about this? What about this? I had the answer for for everything in the book. I will say he got me one with the theme park. There's a theme park. It's a almost a throwaway line, and he did get me there. So one thing slipped through of my research, but
good friend.
Yeah. But in general, it's it was just it's not like a very period piece. Obviously there's elements of the 90s, the cell phone technology and such like that, but it's not very rooted in that, where like an 1800s book or something where I'm
right.
It's drastically different. So
Well, you've got drastically different language and vocabulary and dress and customs, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the people who can do really good historical thrillers or historical dramas are amazing in their ability to put their mindset back hundreds of years or thousands of years.
Yeah, it would be very tough. I mean, it's just, when you're writing, it is cumbersome when you're writing to try to be like, well, I have to make sure I say this a certain way, or I have to add, make sure that this is accurate to the timepiece. And so doing that throughout an entire book, every line, would be very cumbersome, and it takes a lot of talent.
Well, they say write what you know, and I like to say write what you can research.
Yeah.
So if you don't know it, go figure it out. Go find out. Who are the main characters? And tell us about your main characters, and who would you like to see playing some of those characters? You mentioned this as a movie. You've thought of it as a film. So certainly you've kind of thought in terms of who in your head is the dialogue coming from, their mannerisms, their expectations. Who would you like to see in that? For
sure. And I haven't imagined this movie. I actually completed the screenplay. So the screenplay's done. It's submitted. We'll see where that goes, if anything. I definitely, it might be a little old now, or if the movie was made, but Edward Norton is definitely who I envision playing the character. Maybe some of that stems from his time seeing him on screen at Fight Night. Just this kind of darker, gritty, a little misunderstood, wayward. There's just so many elements to his look and the way he's on screen that kind of just screams the main character. Very complicated, tormented almost inside, but like kind of presenting a front face.
An intensity, yeah.
Yeah, so I think he would definitely be the main character. And the main character through the book, he's like, I would say about mid-30s. definitely the focal point. So it would take the actor to really carry that role, versus, other movies, there's a lot of, you can rely on several good actors to kind of fill the screen, versus, if this was to be made, there's really two main characters, his other one being his friend, cop friend, and I imagine someone in that role is like a little bit larger, brooding, kind of soft teddy bear type of cop, a little fatherly figure. He's definitely kind of that in the book to Nick. And so, it excites me. It excites me to think about it. Obviously played in my head a million times.
Sure.
About what each scene would look like, and so, but it would take quite the acting job. But yeah, Edward
Well, I
Norton.
think the character-driven narratives always appeal well to Hollywood because they're really looking for those opportunities to explore the characters more. Plot-driven can be certainly, you get a lot of, your Mission Impossibles and your action movies and stuff like that, where you do get some of the character development, but it almost has to take place over multiple films in order to really kind of see that arc a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think it's interesting we mentioned Hollywood this year. I think it's definitely, especially this last box office weekend, it's definitely been telling that I think audiences in general want original stories, right? I think audiences from the box office are just tired of the same sequels, the same stories, rehashing franchises that were done for 20 years with old characters and trying to redo their arcs. And I think people are just really hungry for original stories. Some new things. We saw Barbie and Oppenheimer, two polarly opposite films, opening on the same weekend, and they just cleaned out.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to, and maybe after this Hollywood strike, the writer's strike and actor strike is over, maybe it will wake up Hollywood to try out some new original stories from original authors, whether it be mine or not. Of course I'm biased, but authors in general, I think there's a lot of stories I've read in our author event network that, they just have incredible original stories that are just waiting to get told. And, book form is usually the best for stories. You can fit so much more in than a feature-length film, but still, I think there's a lot to offer.
Well, I think the fact that you've already written a screenplay on the book, I find that most people in Hollywood don't like to read that much. If you can get them to read a 100-page script as opposed to a 350 or 400-page novel, you're much more have a chance at capturing their imagination. But absolutely, I think that a lot of the best films started as great books. And we've seen that time and time again over many decades, that there's always an original idea that often will come from a novelist, and that we want to capture that story on film. And the challenge, of course, as you know, in trying to write your screenplay, is that you almost have to leave out so many things out of the screenplay that you really, it's really sort of a giving up which baby do you love, which baby are you gonna, you can put the mask on one or two kids, or you're gonna have to pick one. The oxygen mask, and so it's more of a, what do I sacrifice to save the core of the story?
That's very true.
When you're speaking of your audience, who do you think your target audience is, and how are you really kind of speaking to them in terms of what's going to resonate with them?
I think my audience is pretty general. I would say probably, 18 to 18 and older, definitely an adult audience. I don't know if it speaks to individuals, a specific group directly, probably a little bit more towards men than women, just because the main characters are men, and a little bit of I think the main character's struggle is more kind of masculinity related to where men might kind of understand that dynamic or metric a little bit, kind of might hit a little bit more home, kind of individual men problems. that we experience within ourselves and society. So, but it doesn't have a specific message for a group. It's more, it's more of reflective of, where kind of the past and anger and things that have happened to you stand in your life. And, what is that serving a benefit to you? Is that holding you back? How is it affecting your relationships? Maybe it's affecting relationships or things that you might not see or might not recognize. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a moment of, the character's going through it, and you see how it's affecting him from a periphery of angles and how he's dealing with it, and then maybe, at some points overcoming it and moving on. And, maybe when you're reading that, you're gathering something of your own life about, how you're viewing something. And so it might not pertain to a specific audience, but I would say, definitely adults probably resonate more with men than women.
But it sounds like you're really
pretty general
dealing with
audience.
sort of, the typical male way of dealing with trauma and
Mm-hmm.
putting it into a context that doesn't just where you can process it without basically having destructive power.
Yeah, it's kind of that. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I do think there's, men and women deal with certain events in different ways, and I think it kind of explores the male way more. And of course, that's probably because it's my own mind, right? And it's funny, I did my best not to do any self-inserts, but certainly I've had family and friends been like, "Oh, that's you. Mm-hmm. I know you would say that exact same thing." Now, the main character is no reflection of me. If my family knows I'm a very happy-go-lucky, relaxed person. I don't have, a vindictive streak or anything. So they were really surprised when I wrote this book. They're like, "Are these your thoughts?" I'm like, "No, it's my imagination." Does Stephen King's family come over and say, "Oh, wow, Stephen, you're crazy," but I have an active imagination, so.
That's good. Well, last question. I want this will be somewhat of a quick one. Tell us a little bit about your process in writing. Some people get up in the morning. Some people work late at night. Do you have a process that you follow?
Yeah, I kind of get in spurts. So I have an idea, and I'm just on it for 5-6 hours, 10 days in a row, just writing, typing ideas, and I kind of hit a block where I just won't write for a week, couple weeks, maybe even a month, and I just kind of go through life and just kind of thinking about in the back of my head, and something will spark, and it'll be another burst of like a week or two of just furiously typing, changing a little bit of, not changing too much, but just adding on extra layers, and I kind of do that for a long period. It definitely comes in bursts, and I do find that stepping away from the writing and just going out about your normal day and just kind of not forgetting about it, because it's always in the back of your head.
Always, yeah.
Helps a lot, because different conversations or events, maybe you go to a concert or something, it just triggers something, and you're like, "Ooh, that would be really good." "Ooh, that belongs with this character." And it like triggers like a flood. So that's for me. I'm not a routine writer where I get up, I write for an hour, or things like that. It's definitely from a passion kind of burst place.
Excellent. Well, this has been a pleasure, Zachary. It's great to meet with you, and I'm welcome you to the Author Event Network. We're actually going to be selling an event this weekend together, so I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for coming. This has been a great interview, and I wish you all the best of luck with selling your book, The Manifest Destiny, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, thanks. This is awesome, and we're going to do some good selling.
It's going to be a great event. Thank you. Thank you for watching Author Event Network and Meet the Author. We'll see you next time. Take care.